Okay, welcome everyone. This is fantastic numbers here. We've got 91 people on the call already, and numbers are still rising. So thank you very much for setting aside some time on Friday morning to join us. This is a webinar being put on behalf of EMPA. Thank you very much for your attendance at last year's conference, which we had some fantastic feedback after that. We've just also the organising committee's just come back from Brisbane as well, where we had a very successful conference at the end of May. Now, first things first, and most importantly, you must get in your diary the 5th and 6th of November this year, where the EMPA New Zealand conference is taking place at Te Papa once again. It's easy to remember those dates because it's the 5th and 6th is Thursday and Friday. On the Saturday is the general election. So easy to remember. Get that in your diary straight away. And we will be sending out a draft program in the next few days. And that program is shaping up extremely well. So thanks very much for joining us. This was an added bonus on top of your delegate registration for 2025. Philippe Borremans, who's a very dear friend of EMPA, one of the world's, if not the world's, leading experts in the use of artificial intelligence in emergency communications. He has spoken to EMPA conferences before, he's presented, he's run workshops. Sadly, wasn't able to make it to Wellington last November. We very much hope he will again in the future, but he's put on this webinar for us as a added extra for everyone who bought a delegate registration last year. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Philippe, and Philippe will, I'm sure, explain that we're happy to take questions throughout. Could we be the first webinar ever to actually use the Q&A facility on Zoom? Because although we always say it at the beginning of webinars, people always end up reverting to the chat. So if we could try and use that Q&A, that just makes everything very, very straightforward. Now, is the audio okay? Somebody's saying in the chat there's a few audio problems. Yeah, fixed now. Good stuff. Anything further, pop that in the chat. Pop your questions in the Q&A. A big shout out to EMPA board member Nathan Maddock, who's over in Australia. It's very early in the morning. He's actually in the background doing all the technical stuff, which I have no idea about. So thank you very much to Nathan. And without any further ado, I'll hand you straight over to Philippe. Thank you, Philippe.
Okay. Thank you. So normally you should be hearing me. I was muted before, and now you should be hearing me. Is that working? It is? Okay.
Yep.
Good. And I'll just start my video so that at least you can see me. Can you see me? Just waving. Is that working? Okay. Just wanted to the people see my face, and then I'll just cut out the video again. There is no added value. Thank you for the invitation, first of all, to run this webinar. As you said, I mean, I was there last year, and in the meantime, so that is ages in artificial intelligence world, and so definitely this presentation or this webinar will have a bit of another intake on AI and emergency communication. Last year, I still had to talk about the tools and the very practical stuff and prompting and things like that. In the meantime, everybody's using AI, and I think it's time to take a step back. So that's what I would like to do with you, and take a step back from the tools and the nitty-gritty of things, but look at exactly where we have learned in the last 12 months through experience where AI fits and doesn't fit in emergency communication. So that's the agenda, proposed agenda for today. Again, as Sam said, this is a practitioner conversation. So if you have questions, just ask them, put them in the chat, and Sam will let me know. And then I'll answer them. You don't have to wait till the end, but we've foreseen a lot of time to discuss different things as well. So don't worry about that. So the context here is, as I understood, and I think knowing the EMPA audience, I think I've got it right, but you manage public comms during emergencies. You work in government agencies, emergency services, local councils or NGOs. And well, I think we're all trying to figure out what AI means for our work. But as I said, in the meantime, it's not just theory. We have applications. We have applied AI in emergency comms. And I think it's time to take that step back and talk about it a bit more strategically. Now, whenever I speak at conferences or with professionals, with clients, there's two camps, right? There's the utopians, what I call the utopians, and the skeptics. And that is good, but it's the wrong room. I mean, it being in one or the other camp is not what AI is about, and that's not what we're seeing in the field and in emergency operation centers. AI will transform emergency response partly. It will send predictive alerts partly. Instant translation, not there yet. Real-time sentiment, almost. It will save lives. It can. The skeptics, it's not a glorified autocomplete. There is an autocompletion part in how AI works, but it's not glorified. It's very smart. The risks outweigh the benefits. Well, that all depends on how you look at AI and how you implement AI in your emergency comms. And keep humans in charge of everything, that is, as we know, very difficult. Simply because if we want to save lives with good emergency communication, then we need to delegate. And in this case, I'll talk about delegating to AI, but smartly, with responsibility and ethically. So both camps are wrong, but it's also dangerous to stay in those very extreme camps. And that's why I really wanted to focus on actually what is happening, what we've seen working, which kind of frameworks can be applied. And I also would like to give you some hint and tips a bit more down to the end that we, again, can discuss. Now, there is a big question out there, right? So when the next emergency or disaster hits, will AI, and you're all using AI, officially or officiously, there's a lot of shadow AI in the emergency world. Will AI make your job easier, or will it introduce failure modes you haven't planned for? And unfortunately, we've seen both case studies happening. So probably both. The real question is, how do we look at this? How do we identify that? And how can, of course, how can we minimize and mitigate the fact that things can go wrong? And if they go wrong, how do we react? Those are a couple of questions that I'll try to answer. So in part one, I just would like to, again, define the communication context. I think it's important as communicators, but it's also, I mean, it's even more important when you look at AI in the context of emergency communication. So, and why? Because if you look at AI, it's about technology, and there's, of course, a whole collection of vendors, and they will claim that AI can do all of these things, but they don't distinguish between risk communication, crisis communication, and emergency communication. Already for us as communicators, without thinking about AI, it is important to understand the fundamental differences and also the similarities. But it matters when you look at AI, because applying AI governance, and there is the word governance, when you apply AI governance, well, it is designed for one or the other type of communication, risk comms, crisis comms, and emergency comms. And also the way that you use AI is different in all three. And again, if we don't take that into account, it is possible that we make errors, and those errors can be dangerous. So risk comms, I mean, again, just to put this down on the slide, risk comms time frame is before an event. The objective generally is build understanding, change behavior over time, giving the information that people need to help themselves. There is an audience relationship, which is different. It's ongoing. It's generally two-way. tries to build trust through transparency, etc., etc. And if it fails, well, there is ignorance, misunderstanding, and mistrust. Crisis happens during a declared situation. Again, the rhythm is different. The objective is different as well. We want to manage a developing narrative, which is under pressure. It's very much reactive, high scrutiny, adversarial, and the failure mode there is slow, inconsistent, and or seen as deceptive. So it has a different impact if we don't do good crisis comms. Emergency comms, then, that is during active life safety threats. It's a different ballgame. Direct behavior to protect life, that's the main objective. It's urgent, it's one way in a critical window setting. And the failure mode there is we don't reach audiences, we are not believed, and people don't take action, and unfortunately people could die. So each discipline really, when you put on your AI glasses, looks different and has a different impact on how we would use AI in those three situations. So that is important to remember, and I'll come back to that and detail that. So when we map AI on that, risk comms and AI, it's lower stakes for errors. There's time to review what AI does. It's iterative, and AI fits well there. I mean, risk communication, we've got time. We want to change behavior, but it takes time. We recognize that. We do community outreach. We build at the end of the moment, or at the end, we build trust as an outcome. So again, AI fits well. It's fine. In crisis comms and AI, there are medium stakes or medium to high stakes. There is the speed pressure. There is a complex narrative most of the time. And AI definitely can help there, but it needs human gates. We need to be involved in our AI use. We need to have a couple of stops and checkpoints. In emergency comms and AI, there we're talking about life safety stakes, zero error tolerance, and the AI outputs must be verified before release every single time. Now, I would say that you would need to check every single time during crisis comms, but there are systems that have been trained today where, sure, there is always a final check by a human being, but it's much more urgent and important in emergency communication because you are in that very short window where it's life-saving information. There is zero tolerance, and you have to check every single time. So the life safety context is changing what I call the acceptable failure rate from manageable to zero. And so we have to understand those differences, the different dynamics in our communication, and how AI fits there, and what it implies if we use AI in that specific context. I'll be talking about this, and I'm sorry. I mean, this is maybe new, but it's very straightforward. I think this is a framework I've built, and I'm working with, talking about at conferences, and also looking at working with academics to validate it more. It's what I call my Nexus framework, and it talks about anticipating, engaging, sustaining, and restoring. It's a different way of looking at the emergency cycle. There are a couple of things which are more detailed. It's an operational map for me and my clients. I'm just putting it there because I'll make a bit of references there, and I'll just remind where we are in the framework. Now, what AI is actually good at, and I want to start with the good news. Okay, so specifically in emergency comms. AI is, and this is an honest assessment, me having used AI for emergency comms and building systems myself, etc., etc. It is generally useful in emergency comms, but it's not uniformly and not unconditionally. We always have to remember it's one AI tool that is not your single source of truth, and it's also not unconditionally trusted. We need to look at where it fits exactly. The ones that, or the capabilities that matter most, are very specific, bounded, and dependent on human oversight, in order to work safely. We are talking about emergency comms. Again, human oversight here is full-time. Right? Now, it's also looking at, which kind of, how you approach this. And it's not about, can AI help? It can. But the question there is more, where does it help? And where does it introduce risk? Because it will. Both things will happen, right? But if you can identify those risks, first of all, where does AI help? That's a positive. Where does it introduce risk? If you can identify them, then you can also build what I call a governance architecture. And that helps you manage AI in the context of emergency communications. So in the next couple of slides, I'm going to map this on the framework I just mentioned. But let's talk about the gaps. The most dangerous gap in emergency comms, at least that's how I see it, is between something is happening and we have activated. In between, so first you have what I call signal emergence. Events begin generating detectable signals. Hopefully your AI will help you detect those. And on the other side, you have activation. The organization responds, you mobilize, EOC goes up, etc., etc. In between, you've got that critical window. And we have signal gaps there. And that is generally also missed by traditional monitoring systems. It's that a bit of like, and I don't like those concepts that we take from war and the army, but it's the fog of war, right? If we want to stay in the same vocabulary, in between you have that fog of war, and that is where AI can also actually, when it's used very well, can also help. Now, one of the things that is very important in AI in emergency comms is AI assisted decision making. Now, it's a big word, and AI will never make decisions for us. It is assisting us in making decisions, informed, fast, and hopefully correct decisions. But the decision making is still a human activity. But you can actually, again, have a model around that. Mine is called GATE. There are other models. And GATE stands for gathering. So AI is very good in gathering multi-source signal aggregation, situational awareness, social listening, integrating your data that you have from operations, from emergency ops, from all different databases. It's very good in pulling that all together, looking through it with a lens that you have prepared, a framework that you put in there, and it gives you then a very strong early indicator monitoring system. And the machine does the scanning. Humanly, it would be totally impossible. We used to do that manually, and we all know how long that took. Now, in that gather phase, AI is very good. You can there actually, those systems were built to do that almost. Now, in the analysis phase, AI is an assister. So it assists you in pattern recognition, detection, sentiment analysis, but there's still human judgment that makes the interpretation of the analysis. So the AI flags, but the human decides what it means. And that's a very important nuance. Then third phase, at least in my framework, is test. That is, for me at least, that is human-led. So before any AI-assisted output coming from your analysis reaches your community, it must be tested against operational knowledge, local context, and life safety standards. And those are the things that we know. And sure, you could put them in AI, but not fully. Not fully. It has to do with real operational knowledge based on experience, local context, because you have people there that know the local context, local culture, the local language, etc. And we're still not there that an AI system can completely understand that and feed that and use it. So testing for the moment is human-led. Execution then, so we've gathered the signals, AI helped there, the analysis as well, the testing is done. We want to use that information. We want to go through emergency comms execution. That is what I call human authorized. So the principle is that no AI output reaches a live audience without a human gate. No exceptions in life safety environments. So while AI can actually create your communication assets based on the gather phase, the analysis phase, and the testing phase. It can easily create your communication assets, but you are the last sign off. And there's no exception in that. So it's human authorized, as I call it. So this little model actually tells you which stages AI can accelerate and which stages it must not bypass a human being. Again, later on, these slides, I mean, you get a PDF copy, and for those who want the GATE framework and the document that goes with it, if you want it, just scan the QR code at the end, send me an email, and no worries. I mean, happy to share that. I would just like to stop here and check if there are any questions.
Yeah. Hi, Philippe. We've got a question from Sophie. She says, do you have a set of AI prompts you could give to AI to cater at each stage, risk, emergency, and recovery, to account for standard human behavior under each setting?
Well, you could, but there is no standard human behavior, right? We know that there is no, that would be terrible. Imagine that we have standard human behavior. No, you could. I mean, you could actually look at the different phases of an emergency cycle, focus on the communication aspects, and then develop prompts or instructions, because we're moving from prompting to instruction with AI systems. And what would come out of there would be reasonable, would seem logical, but it is not being tested. It is not fed maybe with real-time information, etc. So you still need to go through that GATE framework to double check everything. But it would be possible. I mean, the most basic approach to that is, and I think I spoke and even showed a demo of that last year, is what I'm doing as a quick checkup when I get the call and I'm dispatched somewhere in an emergency area that I've never been in, a country I've never been in. I simply ask with a developed instruction. I simply ask Perplexity AI to give me the demographic, psychographic environment, so that I understand already a little bit when I board the airplane where I'm going to land. Now, when I'm on the ground, usually I work with a fixer, and if it's a luxury emergency setting, as I call them, we'll have sociologists and anthropologists, but sometimes we don't. So you need to work with the information that you have. So yes, you can do that. But again, it's not because you can do it that it's all standardized and automated.
Good stuff. Thank you.
No other questions?
No, we're all good. Moving on.
Okay, good. So I just had a simulation exercise with one of my clients. Their humanitarian organization, most of the time, first on the ground in conflict areas. And we touched upon the context of translation. Same here. I mean, this was for the Eurasia region. So imagine Central Asian countries, etc. But your region as well of the world. I mean, more than 300 languages, I think. Emergency comms in English only reaches part of your population, and real-time transcription, translation, adaptation across channels is partly possible with AI. So it can assist, definitely. But we know that translation can mean two things. It's simply translating from English to French, and an AI system can do that very well. But we are communicators in an emergency context. So we also need to translate into cultural environments, into existing risk perceptions, into existing emergency situations. And that's a different thing. So while, yes, it can translate linguistically, we still have to be there with our local people, with our communities, to do that human cultural review, as I put here on the slide, because that extends, of course, the reach, and that is how you do good emergency communication. Now, real-time transcription, sure, AI can do that. You all use transcription tools, probably. and quick translations and very good translation. I use DeepL AI, which is perfect for most of the languages that are spoken across the globe. And you have AI systems that have been developed specifically. I think New Zealand has one with local languages, so built purposely built and trained on local language. So sure, but let's not forget that we have that cultural review aspect, and that is human. So again, it's speed, sure, but quality check, human, and adaptation of that translation in the correct cultural environment, that is still a human that needs to do that. But it makes it manageable, right? Because before, again, I always tell people, imagine how you did that like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You had to find the translators, came back, double checked, then you had to. Now the first part can be done by AI. And then where does AI sit in the narratives? So we know there is a lot of misinformation and disinformation and malinformation going around. Again, AI can help there. I call that, with a big word, narrative biosecurity. I found it very funky, so I use it. But but what it actually means is that it's the practice of inoculating your communication environment against manipulation, misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and coordinated attacks before an emergency activates. And there, again, AI can be used. We have a couple of techniques to do inoculation, pre-bunking. So that is exposing your communities to weakened forms of false narratives before they spread, and that is based on research. We know today, last year we didn't know, this year, 12 months later, we know that the most effective activities to counter misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation is pre-bunking and inoculation. So pre-bunking is being there before anything happens, and exposing the communities to small forms of anticipated false narratives and showing them how the falseness is incorporated, and of course giving them the correct information. That is true. Again, AI can help there. It can create those messages. It can adapt them to different audiences and communities, again, with human in the loop, but it helps you speed up that pre-bunking activity. And then source authentication, so that is creating verified channels before rumors start to compete, and identifying the sources of misinformation and malinformation. Again, AI can help there as well, and can also point your community members or explain them where to go and where to look for official information before anything happens. And channel mapping is understanding where your communities go for information. Again, if you feed community information into an AI system, which I've done, it comes up with sometimes with some very interesting insights. At one point, I remember it pointed me to small community radio networks that I didn't know about, and my client was pushing for standard approaches like, social media campaigns and what have you. So again, AI can help, but it is based also, and it is checked with local knowledge. Remember, just about misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation, you cannot inoculate a community during an emergency. That needs to happen before. It's really in the anticipate phase of my framework. If you miss that, you're firefighting literally and figuratively sometimes, but it doesn't work. You cannot change or adapt behavior in the middle of an emergency. That happens before. Now, in the engage phase, then AI, like human beings, is put under maximum pressure, but and that's also where it needs the most governance, right? But what AI can do in the engagement mode is drafting your holding statements in seconds. If you know how to work with AI, it creates top-notch quality holding statements in seconds. It will be adapted to your audience. Again, if you know how to use AI, right? Just don't ask ChatGPT, create me a holding statement. Doesn't work like that. It can simultaneously push that to multiple channels. That is not an issue. You can have an agent do that, an AI agent. It will monitor all the time incoming public queries. It will do the triage by volume, by urgency. It will even do sentiment analysis on your incoming public queries. It can track real-time sentiment across different platforms and also social media platforms, of course. And it can flag secondary issues before they escalate. This is all possible. That is not even the question. So again, if you just look at those bullet points, that's a huge amount of time saved, of productivity saved, all that in an emergency situation where you don't have time, where you're very much under pressure. But what AI cannot do in that engagement mode, it's making the call. I wrote a very long opinion piece around the impact of AI on our profession and on the next generation of emergency communicators. It all came down to AI cannot make the call. AI cannot make the judgment call that is needed in emergency comms. And it will probably never, hopefully, it will probably never be used as such. That is a 100% human decision based on experience, based on empathy, based on understanding of culture, etc., etc. AI cannot navigate what we all have to face, the political and operational contexts of events. It cannot understand our true relationship with the local community. It can understand communities. It can do community mapping, yes, but real understanding of our real relationship with local communities, that is still very much impossible with AI systems. And hopefully, it will stay like that as well. It doesn't sign off on messaging that has life safety consequences. Again, human decision. And of course, it's not going to replace the senior communicator who has been in the EOC for 18 hours and has 15 years experience. We're not there yet. And hopefully, I hope that also from an ethical point of view, because we're talking about emergency communication, life-saving communication, we will never hand over those life-saving decisions and judgments to a machine. So AI in engage mode, force multiplier, definitely. Never a decision maker. It's mentioned a lot, right? Human in the loop. But hopefully in your organizations, it's not a governance checkbox. It's really a requirement that we need for several reasons. One of them is that AI was not trained on your communities or the communities that you serve. It was trained on the internet. So it doesn't know very specific geographies, community relationships, cultural sensitivities, etc., 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 etc. Not the details. The big lines, definitely, because it's been documented before. But it's not real knowledge. It's information. AI doesn't understand consequence, and let that sink in, because it is an important difference between a machine and a human being. So it can produce any kind of information that is grammatically correct if it's text, it contextually plausible, it looks correct, fantastic, well thought, etc. But it can be dangerous. It doesn't look at the consequence if it gets something wrong. It has no stake in the outcome. We do, right? We as communicators. And you really have to understand that. And then accountability. So, you will get questions from human beings, and the question of accountability will come. So what are you going to say? Oh, it was the machine? That is not an answer that works. So you need to look at workflows on how the accountability around the use of AI in emergency comms and in emergency ops, how that flows, and you need to document that, and that is crucial to protect your own organization, but also to be, I think, ethical in the use of your AI systems. This is something that I see a lot when I work with clients, and it works for both, the public sector and governments and NGOs and UN systems. It's a sustained phase, right? We know we're in an environment where perma crises happen more and more. It's not just a one-off thing; it's double up, and it takes a long time to be resolved. So there's fatigue, right? There's fatigue not only in the comms team or in the emergency comms team, but also our stakeholders get fatigued, our audiences get fatigued about our messages. There is what I call narrative drift. So, official messaging and community perceptions are going their own way. Of course, misinformation or disinformation will fill that gap. And there is a cadence drop, and that is normal. It's human. But again, AI can help in that sustained mode because AI doesn't stop working, right? You could do automated monitoring for narrative drift all the time, every single second. You can maintain that update cadence because you can do automated drafting and scheduling, human reviewed, but it can be done, right? It can track your stakeholder engagement across multiple audiences at the same time. Without AI, it would be impossible. And it does very well in identifying issues before they actually become secondary crises. There is a lot of work being done applying AI in situational awareness. It's incredibly interesting work. Last year, I think I mentioned about digital twins or virtual audiences. I don't know which concept I used. At the time, so the digital twins virtual audience is simply replicating a community, for instance, in a virtual environment through AI, which allows you to test your messages from your machine, from your PC, with a virtual community, but which is a look-alike from a real community that you're working with. Now, 12 months ago, we were at around 70% match between the real community and the virtualized community. Today, we're at 90 plus 90%. And in an emergency situation, for me, that's good enough. It will tell me how my messages land, if I've misunderstood a symbol or a meaning or a risk experience that I didn't calculate into my message crafting, etc., etc. So that is definitely possible today. In the restoration phase, then we do need still to invest a lot of time in communication after the crisis ends, because we need to explain that restoration phase, which is crucial in the emergency cycle. We need to after action, and I hope after action reports are not just a tick off box, but really the opportunity to learn and to improve all the time. And it's also an accountability towards the communities that we serve, I think. So it is an important activity. Sometimes we need to reestablish an information relationship with affected communities. And also we need to be very clear on what went wrong in comms. Not just in the overall response, but also in comms, because otherwise we don't learn. Now, again, AI can support that aspect. I'm working with a startup in the US. It's purpose-built AI for emergency management. We have a module in there which builds after-action reports based on human input, with checks, with human in the loop all the time. But it builds after-action reports that focuses on that learning objective, on looking at what went wrong, how can we adapt it, how can we improve all the time, and it works fantastically well. I mean, the reports are actually better than most after-action reports I've seen. So post-event comms at scale, again, whenever you talk about AI drafting something or creating content, it does that very well, as long as you know how to do it. And then still that monitoring aspect, because it's not because the acute crisis or emergency is finished. that there is no lingering misinformation that goes on. We've seen that happen almost every single time, and sometimes that peaks and then brings on another crisis or emergency. So monitoring there, AI systems are built to do that. They do it very well. So again, in this phase, AI can help you understand what the experience was of the communities that you served, of your own organization, where areas of improvement exist, et cetera, et cetera. And it does that better than actual manual reviews. So again, this is where AI can help. Any questions before I go on?
Yeah. Hi, Philippe. Yeah, we do have a few. So I'll rattle through them. Sophie's asked, does it depend on the AI tool used and what it's capable of, tracking real-time sentiment, etc., or can you train any tool, e.g., Copilot?
Well, depends on what level of sentiment analysis that you need. But basic sentiment analysis can be done through all publicly available generative AI systems. So I'm talking about ChatGPT and Claude and what have you that you have at $20 a month. They can all be trained and set up to do basic social media and general data. So based on your input, sentiment analysis. And it's not bad. If you have nothing else, it's better than nothing, right? Or than doing it manually. So definitely it can help. When you look at serious, what we call enterprise grade, or based on emergency management principles, the serious tools, yes, that is the AI in the back end there that will do it. But that AI is tweaked specifically to do sentiment analysis. So they put in much more work, and those are the sentiment analysis reports that you get in your media and social media monitoring tools. And then there's the third level. Then we speak about purpose-built and purpose-trained AI. That's a different ballgame, takes a lot of time, a lot of money to do that. And those are the platforms who do situational awareness, predictive analytics. So those are the platforms that actually will tell you before anything happens that there is a bot network being activated to attack your organization, or to start a mis or disinformation campaign around a potential emergency before it even happens. So you've got these different levels, right? It depends on what you think is right for you. If you have nothing today, or you're doing a lot of stuff still manually and you have small budgets, then yes, you can work with your ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, what have you, at $20 a month, and instruct them to do sentiment analysis on the data that you provide. That is possible, and you will get basic but good results, because the other alternative is doing it manually and making mistakes. The second is built into the enterprise grade monitoring platforms, where the usual suspects that many organizations already use today. And then the third level is really bespoke, and that's as I said, that's a different ball game. Very interesting area of development. I'm working with 2 technology partners in that area, and the reports I see there are really impressive, because they demonstrate how AI finds these fake accounts, bot networks being activated. They analyze the narrative that will potentially be used, which kind of audience they will try to convert or attack, etc. So really interesting area of development, but those are a bit more expensive, so to say. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Philippe. Just got a couple more. One from Glyn Waters. Glyn says, Philippe, to what degree are you or others educating the intelligence function within the emergency response community about the use of AI? I find that my public information team often does not have the resources to fully gather all the info it needs, and we often rely on the intelligence function.
Yeah. It's to be very honest, it's a function that I have not worked with a lot, except in UN emergency systems where I was a consultant and working with them. But my mandate was comms, and you're right. I understand what you want to say. I also had issues um, getting the right information and the right intelligence. But I haven't engaged with them in any of for the last 12 months, in any of my engagement with emergency organizations from different types, government or UN or local government. No, I haven't. And it should. I mean, we should make that bridge, right? But we also, I mean, this opens up an all other topic that I'm very passionate about. But we already need to build those bridges between public information officers and emergency communicators and the operational side of things. It's not always very how would I say natural. It should be. And so yeah, but no, from my end, the intelligence function, and I don't even know. I mean, I assume they are using AI systems and tools. I mean, everybody is. But in what way? In does that translate in the information we would need in an emergency? I don't know. Good question, and I'm taking note. It's something that I'm going to dive into.
Good stuff. Thank you. One from EMPA founder Barb Ryan. She says, "Hi Philippe, have you
Hi,
found
Bob.
AI? Have you found AI helpful in the brainstorming phase as you plan your inoculation strategy?"
Yeah, that's one of the things that AI does very well, because if you think about AI is not it's not intelligent, right? I mean, it's been trained on a lot of data. It understands your question, and it responds in what it thinks to be a logical, I'll fill in the blanks as a response. So that's not really intelligence, but it's already a good thing. It's already smart. In the brainstorming phase, it's incredibly powerful. So what I actually do, brainstorming ideas, brainstorming frameworks, brainstorming approaches, tactics, and strategies. If you know how to engage with the AI system that you're using, which kind of context to give it, and which kind of data to give it, it will be a very interesting and very smart brainstorm and sparring partner. Because you can also ask, many people don't do that, but I do that very often. I think I've got a bright idea. I think I'm so smart. And I put it into the system, and then I ask it, shoot it down. And it will. And that's an interesting brainstorming aspect as well, is take your perfect plan and ask the AI system to shoot it down, to find holes, to poke holes in it. Already that is so interesting to see and to work with. And then on a more strategic level, I don't know if you can call it brainstorming, but at the end of the day, it is a bit like that. What I do is I apply game theory on crisis and emergency strategy development with AI. And so that's where it becomes very interesting and strategic, because I've trained an AI on understanding game theory, and that's an accepted theory coming from the military, but accepted in business and government. And what you can actually do is, with senior staff, most of the time, that's how I do it, is play the game through AI with them. So what it does, it gives you different potential scenarios, outcomes, depending on the focus that you have on certain stakeholders, and it will give you those different paths. So if decision A is made, then this will probabilistically happen with this and this audience. This audience will react differently. What is your next step? Well, let's make that decision. Oh, but that is what next probably will happen with this and this audience. So that is a very interesting workshop most of the time with clients, because it expands the horizon, right? And it's very credible as well. I mean, it's brainstorming, right? But when you know how to work with it and you instruct it, the response is very, very realistic, and it makes it fun at the same time as well, because people find it so interesting that a machine can think about all those scenarios at the same time, and it can.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. And that idea about getting particularly one AI agent to critique another's work is incredibly powerful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just one more for now. This is from Anonymous. Do you see a role for AI in translating generic hazard warnings into tailored impact information for different communities, locations, or user groups?
Yeah, of course. And that already exists. And it's even open source. So if you want I think it's like 5 pages prompt, I can send you the link. And of course, it needs input, right? It needs the type of emergency, background on your community or your audience, which type of notifications you're doing, also which geographic environment. So because it follows the templates, the international templates, but also the localized templates. And it even, I think, goes into different languages. So yeah, that exists and is possible. So don't hesitate. Scan the QR code at the end, send me an email or whatever, a message on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the open sourced, very, very, very long prompt. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Philippe. Back to your prezzo.
Okay. So part 3, I think there are only 4, so don't worry. The more negative things, where AI itself creates risks. So they're different in emergency comms because there's different risks. But for us in emergency comms, it's about this what I call asymmetry. So very practically, when an AI makes an error in a certain private sector context, then it's embarrassing and you can correct it. But if it makes a mistake in emergency comms, that will potentially direct community behavior, and it could be potentially fatal. So let's not forget, we should be, as emergency communicators, we're all about protecting lives. We should be even more strict with the AI systems that we use. And then there is a not so new risk landscape, but still, it did introduce different risks in different phases with different impacts. And so we need to really understand that risk landscape and apply to our profession. There's really new threats environments out there, and we need to look at, okay, these are generated most of the time with the help of AI, but how are we going to manage that? So understanding both the positive and the negative one is really important. And also, what I often see is that if we think about, for instance, deep fakes, well, the only technological solution today to detect deep fakes is actually AI, while deep fakes are created thanks to AI. So it's always that double side of a technology coin, right? Misinformation, we know it travels faster than official messaging. It's also most of the time has more impact and is more credible, or supposedly credible. And that is a huge problem. We fight against that in almost every type of emergency today. I don't think there's one type of emergency that doesn't have one or the other part of misinformation, malinformation, or disinformation. So because AI-powered content generation is incredibly fast and can be produced at industrial scale, well, it is of course being misused as such by the people who have fun and who sometimes make a lot of money by going into misinformation and disinformation campaigns. Social media platforms, which have a huge impact, with or without AI, well, these are optimized for engagement. And that means that AI crafted messaging that knows how to trigger the engagement systems and methodologies of those platforms always win against the human being. That is maybe not an AI problem, maybe a bit more a human problem, but still it's in the AI context. Official messaging. We want to be accurate, measured, but by definition, that is a bit less emotionally activating. It's these standard messages, very dry, without any kind of empathic vocabulary, or even totally misconstrued from a risk perception point of view. And of course, I mean, the people and the organizations who are specialized in misinformation or malinformation and disinformation, they know how to trigger emotions. And I'll talk a bit about rage farming later on, but they exactly know which words to use because they've tested them, right? They do A/B testing like any kind of marketing agency. And of course, I mean, our audiences today cannot tell the difference between AI-generated misinformation and legitimate communication. I can show you information created by AI, put it next to human-made content, and you wouldn't know the difference. And I'm talking about voice and text and audio and video and everything in between, right? It is today at a point where it's very, very, very difficult for a human being in an emergency situation to make a difference. Of course, if you sit at home with your coffee and with your machine in a safe environment, and you take a couple of hours to analyze one single piece of content, maybe you'll see the difference, but not in an emergency environment, and not where people are at risk and get that information. They cannot make the difference anymore. So there is a consequence, because when our communities act on false information, that could be wrong shelter location, wrong evacuation route, wrong risk levels. Well, those decisions which are influenced by misinformation, disinformation, could potentially be fatal, and that is a different ballgame than reputation management. So rage farming, I mentioned it. That is, I put in the definition here. It's the systematic, intentional provocation of anger, outrage, or fear online, designed to drive engagement, spread content virally, and manipulate public behavior. That is actually a job as well. There are people who do this full time and make a lot of money with it, right? It is also a technique in psyops, in military environments, in intelligence agencies from across the globe, and also from just pressure groups who take this as a technique to push forward their message. In an emergency context, it is very dangerous, because it creates fabricated and distorted claims about failures, government failures or your agency failure or whatever. It triggers emotions, and so it's specifically built to trigger these emotions of anger and outrage. It is a coordinated amplification. So I was talking about those bot networks and fake account networks. They use both bot networks and human networks to amplify that. And then once the system starts to run with it, meaning the social media platforms, because they are built to trigger engagement, they take over, and then it becomes very big. And then, of course, traditional media jumps on the wagon, and then you're in full-blown crisis mode, simply because someone or an organization decided to create a rage farming attack. It goes as far as targeting people personally, and it goes as far as provoking physical harm. Right now, in emergency comms, this is not the public relations problem, right? It's directing, it's targeted at the communities. It wants to change their behavior away from your official guidance. So it really breaks down your own communication efforts, and that is dangerous, and it's crucial to understand it. Simply, people who are outraged are not evacuated, right? And we've seen that, and these campaigns are really insidious. But they are, if you take a step back and look at it objectively, they are very smart and very, very well thought out. They know how a human being, so they work on our biases. They understand human psychology. They know how to trigger outrage and anger. They know how to segment audiences. They know how to use technology at scale. and they know how to make money out of it as well in some cases. So from a purely technological setup, it is interesting to look at, but it is of course terrible if you face a rage farming attack. As I said, the platforms that we actually use to communicate, we often say, oh, our partners and what have you, but platforms are optimized for engagement, not for accuracy. I mean, they don't care, right? The algorithm doesn't care whether content is true, and there is no incentive to check that. It only knows that people are clicking, sharing, and reacting. So false information, fine. If it works, if it triggers the algorithm, it's fine for them. And also imagine that you have evacuation orders. Well, the rumors are already out there, and you don't have the same algorithmic footing as people who are misusing those platforms. Your alert and your alert and a fabricated story, for instance. I mean, that's the same input, but the emotional activation is totally different, and that will then trigger more engagement and more sharing. And the reach, again, we need to look at how we measure communications, emergency communications, and the use of AI in emergency communications. But reach without credibility doesn't change behavior, right? It's not about the numbers. You don't want to have a million reach. You want to actually change behavior. And if you can do that with, I don't know, 500 reach or 1,000 reach or so many engagements or whatever, then that works. It's not about the big numbers, while an attack is about big numbers, right? As I said, I mean, and you know that AI systems, they can produce stuff that you would think is like 100% correct, looks great, is fantastic, but in emergency comes wrong is of course not acceptable. So hallucinations are still a problem. They're being managed, and every single new model iteration gets better at having less hallucinations, but still they are there. So they generate plausible sounding information, but it's totally incorrect. And they don't signal that uncertainty, right? Unless you push the system to double check again. Are you sure? Can you find me the reference? Click on the reference and check the references, because AI systems can invent references as well. And it's also the tone of voice, which sounds very confident, very authoritative, and saying, oh, this is exactly the truth that you're looking for, but it can be totally fabricated. Again, the difference between corporate comms and emergency comms is that, we are responsible for lives, so we should look at hallucinations with a very strong lens, and that's why I say human in the loop there, that checking in the gate model, that is important to follow that. AI assisted situation reports based on incoming field data. Watch out if your system has not been trained on that. If your system has not been instructed on how to do that, it will hallucinate. Automated responses to public queries. Again, automated responses, I would say, in emergency communication situation, a total no-go, because the chance of hallucinations, again, is strong. Content, yes, it can translate, but there will be errors, so you have to double check anyway. But that's what you would do with the human translation as well. And then summaries, watch out if you ask an AI system to generate summaries of rather complex technical stuff for public release. You'd better have it checked by the tech people who understand the thing. So the subject matter expert needs to double check that. AI is not a subject matter expert, right? It's a language model, so it's still with the human to look at that, and then it brings us to accountability. Audio and video, you've seen those, deep fakes in different versions, audio, video combined, even all the way up to fabricated press conferences with journalist in the room, or manipulated real footage. It's another aspect. It doesn't have to be fully invented and generated by AI. It can just take real footage, but adapt it and manipulate it. Now, imagine a deep fake of an official issuing a premature all clear, or directing evacuation in the wrong location, etc., etc. It unfortunately, I mean, I wouldn't be amazed if that happens. And that's why we need to look at detection, and that is a challenge. Our detection tools, again, based on AI, are not perfect. They do require time to deploy. So it's all about pre-emergency preparation, right? You need to invest time to understand AI, to integrate AI, to train AI, to instruct AI, and see if it can actually support you to identify and detect fake audio and video. But that will be, I mean, it's already is. There have been a couple of cases, but that will be one of the biggest challenges that we have. It's deep fakes and things like that, audio, video, or complete situations that seem very realistic and are totally created by bad human beings, right? So as I said, I mean, pre-bunking, source authentication, channel mapping, those are again pre-event preparation activities that you can do. And again, as I said before, AI can actually help there. AI assisted social listening in the anticipation phase, source authentication, so that your communities know where to look for real information. I've said that AI can help there, and pre-bunking as well. But it's all in the pre-phase, and of course, it's always the case. And I think we know that, but we need to convince the powers that be that preparation phase is so crucial also for emergency comms and the use of AI in that context. It's not different than anything else. We need the time to understand AI, to see where it fits, how it will fit, and train it and instruct it, test it, and that all happens in the preparation phase. I like this one because I had so many discussions with clients on this, and I'm currently working on a couple of documents actually where AI governance is actually stipulated in the organization, because it wasn't. But AI system produces the output, a human reviews it and approves it, a manager authorized the workflow, an executive approved the AI governance policy, an agency had signed off on the technology deployment. But who is accountable? Well, all of them. But only if that was designed in advance, and only if that was agreed upon in advance, and only if there was a protocol in place in advance. So the question is that, do you have a written AI governance policy that specifically looks at the accountability for AI-assisted emergency communication? I don't know, but you should have one as soon as possible, because you're all using AI. And I'm sure that in many of your organizations, there is a lot of shadow AI as well. So you need that AI governance policy like tomorrow. And of course, if it becomes complex, then it gets harder, right? That accountability is difficult in very complex multi-hazard environments. So I'm asking a couple of questions through my overall framework there. Does your AI-assisted communication perform equally across all affected communities? Language differences, limited digital access, limited trust in official sources? Because like any kind of emergency communication, with or without AI, it needs to be inclusive, right? So does your AI system helping you communicate? Well, does it understand the fact of being inclusive? Does it take into account all those different audiences? Has your AI workflow been tested against cultural, linguistic, and infrastructural diversity? Or is it just based on the majority demographic? Wouldn't be a good thing, right? And then responsibility. Who is responsible for reviewing each single step of AI output, or where it makes sense or where it is needed according to your own framework? So to me, it's very simple. Accountability is not only who's responsible and checking off those boxes, but it's broader. It's also integrating your community diversity, your ethics, respect for culture, linguistic differences, etc., etc. That inclusivity, and that should be part of that framework and accountability system that you should have, like tomorrow. Repeating myself, but it is important. Any questions till now?
Yeah, hi, Philippe. There's one that follows on from what you were talking about in terms of the deep fakes. You've already covered some of this, but I think it might be worth having another discussion. We're seeing more and more AI-generated images during an emergency, which can create fear, e.g., a shark in floodwaters. Some of these look very real. Any suggestions on how to overcome this?
Well, it's pre-bunking, right? It's informing be very honest with your different communities that are your responsibility on, first of all, those things exist. Here are a couple of examples. This is how you can recognize them. This is how you cannot recognize them. And this is where official information comes from. If you really want to know the truth, then check our channels. In very short, that's pre-bunking. And that's an investment that you need to make now before anything happens. So that is one of those aspects that you can use to counter these fake imageries. There are other things. I mean, we'll soon have legislation is in place, at least in the EU, but that will expand. And we start to have a labeling system. So in the image, in the back end of that image is certain code and, excuse me, labeling systems that will be recognizable through a kind of detector that you would have in your browser. But again, that's based on technology, so not everyone will have that, etc. But there are a couple of things. But I think for me, the most important one is inform and educate your audiences. Be very open. That exists and people know it exists. But do small workshops if you can with your communities and say, hey, we'll show you a real image and a fake image. Which one is it? How do you recognize it? Use it as an excuse to engage with your communities again, and then point them to the single source of truth during emergency, so that they know that when they see images, at least they will double check with your channel and say, okay. At the same time, it is also a burden on the emergency function in emergency comms, because you will need to check as well. You will need to tweak your monitoring systems to look for these potentially fake images, and you will need to have to counter them, and you will need to have information ready to do that, etc. So it puts on an additional layer, but that's the complexity in which we work.
Great, thank you, Philippe. One more quick one. How good is AI at language translation?
Very good. Well, very good. Yeah, what does that mean, Philip? So I'm using AI translation. DeepL is for years my favorite product. It's European. I think it's a German startup. And to give you an idea, so when I translate from English to French or from English to Dutch, which are two of my mother tongues, and I consider myself a little bit fluent in English. I can actually, I actually don't have to change anything in French or in Dutch, in the Dutch or French translation, except small nuances that I say, like, I would make it more friendly, or more, I would change that word because there's a difference between Flemish, so Dutch from Belgium, and Dutch from the Netherlands, or French from Belgium, or French from France. But that's nuance. I could actually use it as such, copy, paste, and go. I tweak it from time to time for those very small details and nuances. But very good, very good. Now, depends on how many languages DeepL does, right? I don't know which language you have in mind, but it does a lot already. So yeah, good.
Thank you, Philippe. Back to you.
Okay. So just to come back to what we've seen up till now a little bit. On the left, you've got my 4 phases of this model I'm using. So anticipate, engage, sustain, and restore. Opportunities for AI in each phase, risks for AI in each phase, and then governance priorities in each phase. You'll get a PDF copy of my slides. This is one of the most important, I think, slides, because it gives you that overview, but also the governance priority. And I do think it's important that we all have governance in place for AI. We all use it, officially or officiously. That depends. But we need that governance in place. So definitely one to look at again later on. Now, as I said, when you start looking at your governance, you know that the risk profile of AI is not the same for every single phase. So design for the phase. Build governance protocols that are phase aware. Where are you? Are you in, starting phase, middle phase, what have you, or depending on how you call them, but where are you in the emergency cycle? Look at your governance protocols for each phase, because it is different from phase to phase, right? And then test. If you test your protocol, you test it across the whole cycle, right? In the sustain phase, what I've seen is where governance of AI commonly degrades, because it's this long phase. We need to sustain our efforts. We spoke about fatigue, etc., and that's where then mistakes happen. Test it there specifically and deliberately if you want to test your protocol. That's my advice. So design it for each phase, bring it together, and then test it across the whole cycle. 4, and I think is the last one. So how do you build governance? Identifying where you have gaps. So you all, as I said, you all adopted AI officially, depending on which environment you work in, how happy you are with the official organizational AI tools, or if you still prefer jumping on ChatGPT or Claude and use it, outside of work or whatever. But in low stakes environments, that gap is manageable. But in our environment, it's really a vulnerability. So look at that governance gap. Readiness. So once you have that policy, can your team execute that policy under the conditions of an actual activation? That's your simulation exercise. And you need to be able to run that several times. So it's not just a document that you tick off, it's actually a skill or a capability. And then it does take time. So it needs to be built, tested, and embedded before your next emergency. So it's not something that you improvise. You need to take time. People need to sit down, think about it, work on it. It's a mini project, right? And then, of course, you need the mandate within the organization to do that. And so I'm going to show you a couple of building blocks that I use with clients whenever I do that for them or with them. It's not for them, it's with them, because they need to be engaged fully. So typical things that I see are, of course, social media monitoring platforms, which incorporate AI, translation and transcription, content scheduling, chatbots as well. Many of them. I find it, never was really interested in chatbots, but people think it's interesting, so why not? Clipping services and all these things. So standard media monitoring, but AI assisted. Then when I look at that, generally I'm asking, so, what is your policy covering these tools in life safety context, so in emergency comms context? Has your team been trained on failure modes, not on just using them, but what to do when something goes wrong? Is there a human authorization step before anything goes out? Who's accountable? And how do you document that accountability? So that is the mapping aspect. And you cannot create just a governance thing out of thin air. You need to map before you start drafting. One of the questions as well is not how does this tool help? I mean, that's interesting, but how does this tool fail? And what does that look like an hour or two or three into a major event? Because that's when you actually look at the failure system, and that's when you can do those exercises. So what AI tools are in use at each stage? What are the specific failure modes of each tool? Hallucinations, mistranslations, lagging. There's different troubles with different models. What is the operational consequence? And what would your team do, or what would you do as an emergency communicator if your tool failed at the worst possible moment? It's asking those hard questions that will allow you to map that into your cycle. I'm using my CNF model again: anticipate, engage, sustain, and restore. So how bad does it, if something goes wrong with AI, how bad does it impact your anticipate, your engage, your sustain or restore activities? Which failures are recoverable and which are not, because in some cases there will be no recovery possible. And where does the human gate currently sit? And is it close enough to the output before anything goes out? So you need to stress test these tools. We do that mainly through simulations, but it is important to stress test it because, again, that's how you build experience, build training. It's a good excuse to train people up in AI as well. And then, of course, setting up your governance. So going back to my first one, you can use that. The gate model, you can use it. Gather, has the AI system gathered from appropriate sources? Are the inputs correct, verified? Has the system been fed information relevant to the specific event, etc.? In the analysis phase, has a human analyzed the output for accuracy? Does the output reflect the actual situation? Are there errors? And so you can ask these questions in again, this is a different approach to the emergency cycle phases, but you can ask those questions again, and they will give you answers. And based on those answers, you can look at your governance model and your protocol. So I've seen a lot of organizations, and they have this full this overall company or organization-wide governance policy, but overall is not good enough for comms, and a policy for comms is not good enough for emergency comms, right? So try to make it very realistic for your own specific environment of emergency communication. Approved tools, how not to use them, what is prohibited, what are the human review stages, what is the accountability structure, and what is the escalation procedure. That's the minimum for a governance policy for emergency comms. Then, of course, train and practice workflows. I mean, it's not just a piece of paper sitting there or an article on the internet. You need to train. You need to train on deepfakes. You need to train on hallucinations. You need to train on AI-generated issues of your own AI system, but also of third-party AI systems, etc. That's training, simulation. And then, as I mentioned before, it was also, I think, answer to a question: map your communities, the information networks, and then do pre-bunking to anticipate false narratives, to prepare them for misinformation, disinformation, and what have you, but also look at how you're going to apply that knowledge and that mapping if something goes wrong with your own AI system, right? So always ask that question. We know it's dangerous out there. How can we prepare our communities? But what if we are the origin, or our AI system is the origin of an issue? And test it. Where to start? This week. Don't wait for the next budget cycle. You can do that without budget. You 3 points, and I'll take you through the 3 points. But also, I mean, don't wait for this. I think I've mentioned it already. You need it yesterday and tomorrow, but start with that. Because it's also an interesting way to learn about AI and to see where it fits in your organization and see where it fits in your workflow of emergency comms. So starting with this is really actually a good thing. If you're not too far in your AI integration, well, it's starting with this maps the terrain, so to say. It gives you a frame in which to work. The audit. So you start with your audit. You do your failure mode exercise and you write your doctrine document. And it's just a doctrine document is just a one pager, right? It's not the big book and the big manual. It simply needs to answer what tools are approved, what requires human review, and who is accountable. And it's just one day. You do your stakeholder interviews, you do your own thinking, you do a little workshop of an hour, and in one day you can already have a draft doctrine document or policy document, depending on how you want to call it. For the failure mode as well, take your AI assisted tool that you have or think about implementing and run a scenario. It breaks. It does stupid things. It gives us wrong information. What does it actually look like? Who catches it? Who doesn't catch it? How does that work? What do we do next if that happens? Again, it's not a big investment, half a day. It's a mapping exercise, right? Auditing as well. I mean, what do you have? Make the index, make the list, and for each tool you ask who approved it. Is there a human review step, and what happens when it fails? Again, half day of work. So in total, you have 2 days, and you will have a very good, strong, and detailed policy environment map and a document, and you'll have done a quick exercise as well. Doesn't require budget, just decisions and time, but they are crucial. So how does that look like? Well, you would then at the end have a tool inventory. You will have a written policy. You would have what I love to put down on slides and work with clients on is practiced governance, not just governance, but practiced. You've tested it under conditions, under extreme conditions in a simulation environment. You have your pre-event, pre-banking and inoculation system up and running, and you have named accountability. And, I have a question. Has anyone set this up in their organization or not? You can answer or not, but most of the time it's no, we didn't. But again, important step to take if you're going to work with AI. So that was my presentation. Really an open discussion, right? We've covered distinction between risk, crisis, and emergency comms. I spoke about my 2 frameworks, the model, AI capabilities and failure modes, and the governance architecture that you would need. So again, any questions, go ahead. We have time. Happy to answer them.
That's fantastic, Philippe. First of all, thank you so much. That's been incredibly insightful. There's a couple of quick questions that are already in the chat. One is Alison Jones has asked a further supplementary question about these fake images, which obviously are a real concern for people. And you mentioned a little bit about this new tagging system that's coming in, but can you say a bit more about that? So the question really is, how do we know what's real? How do we know what isn't? Will it become impossible to tell what's a real image and what's not? Or is it already impossible?
Yeah, it is already impossible. So it is already impossible in the way for a human being. And definitely in the context of an emergency, because, the stress we're under and what have you. But even in normal, so to say, normal situations, it becomes very, very, very difficult to see what is fake and not fake. So one of the techniques is that for real emergency content, there would be a additional layer of information on each piece of content, which would be traceable, recognizable as being authentic. It's technical, but again, if you have more questions on that, send me an email. I can send you a technical overview and what it actually means and how far people are with that. I've got one client who's thinking about integrating that, but then when we had the discussion, it's not perfect. It's difficult. It's there's one way that I think is really worth looking at, and I've used it and tested it, and I build a tool around it, and that is the use of blockchain. So blockchain, once a piece of content is stamped by blockchain, it is immutable. It cannot be changed. And so you always have a proof that that piece of content is yours, is true, is the correct guidance. And that's another way to go about it. But it's a complex question on how are we going to actually manage deep fakes. But I can tell you, yes, today, for most people, it's impossible to make the distinction. Yeah.
Thank you, Philippe. One more from Tony Skiffington, who says, any tips or examples on how to leverage the algorithms better ourselves?
Yeah, but that's a good one because I recently had a discussion with a couple of colleagues, and we we were thinking about it. That but we can actually, and we know how the algorithm, we know how to trick them, we know how to, and then you quickly go like, oops, oh yeah, true, we have an ethical code, we don't do those things, right? So it's producing good content. So mainly it's producing good content which is completely adapted to the channel that you're going to use it on, understanding those algorithms and what makes them kick off, and build the content around that. It's also understanding good search engine optimization. It's understanding how AI systems understand and search the web and retrieve information from the web. It's all these things together. For instance, I mean, LinkedIn just changed their algorithm, has a huge impact on reach and etc. So you have to know that and then adapt how you write for LinkedIn. But tomorrow, Facebook will change again, and then you'll have to adapt for that. And Google is now adapting for AI retrieval. So how do you write a good content piece so that you make sure that when someone is asking AI, I'm living here, there's a fire that many kilometers from my end, where do you think I should go? Because people are already doing that, right? They're asking AI. How do you make sure that your response is the first result or the most trusted result for an AI system? All these things are technical, but as a communicator, you need to understand that, because we are content creators as well, and we need to understand the platform for which we write content. So yeah, I've changed, for instance, just for my newsletter. I've changed the format of my articles, not my tone of voice or how I write, but the format. So what comes first, what comes second, etc. That's just because I understand that AI retrieval systems think like that. So if I structure my content, it will pop up more when people look for information around crisis, risk, and emergency comms. And I know it works because a couple of weeks ago, I asked a question about risk comms to, was it Claude? Or, no, it was Perplexity. And one of the sources was one of my own articles that I've written. So it works, but you have to understand those differences.
Brilliant. Hey, and just a reminder, people, just pop your questions in the Q&A, not the chat function. But I have got one here from Erica Harrison. I work for a large organization that covers a lot of sometimes not obviously related policy areas. Do you think it's possible to write governance policy that's general enough to adapt to the different emergencies these areas might face? Or do you think they need to be specific to each emergency?
Well, so the question, I'll return it with a question. Do you think, when you think about it, do you think your AI governance would need to change depending on the emergency you're managing. It could be. I don't know, right? I don't know your organization well enough to give you a straight answer. But by asking that question, you will find the answer yourself. If you do your audit and you do the exercises and things that I showed here, you will come to that crossroad where you say, wait, in this type of emergency, although it's the same organization, we need to adapt our protocols. Or, hey, our protocol works in every single emergency time. So it's by asking those questions and doing that exercise and those workshops, etc., that you'll find that answer for yourself. But it could be that one is enough and covers everything. It could be that you'll need to adapt to every type of emergency that your organization could be responsible for, at least for the emergency comm side. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Actually, Philippe, you could probably just pop your camera on now, which will
Sure. Yeah.
which would be good.
Yeah.
Have we got any? We've still got 65 people online, which is fantastic. Thank you. Have we got anybody else? Any other questions in the Q&A? Here's one from Tony again. Thank you, Tony. Is Philippe prepared to share his top tips on getting content to be picked up effectively by AI retrieval systems? It's opaque and changing, so she would love any insights, and I'm sure we all would.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, again, top 10 tips. I can give you even a kind of guide on how to write and how to construct, depending on which platform. It's all out there, but I've made my own format and analysis. So happy to share that. Yeah, definitely.
Thank you. Right, have we got any more questions? We'll just wait a little bit longer, but that's been incredibly comprehensive, Philippe. Thank you, and thank you for incredibly generous giving up your time to talk to us today. Also, obviously, you're based in Portugal, and it's now a different day to the day when you started this webinar. So, thank you very much appreciated. And also for your huge generosity in offering to follow up with people. Now, you said there was there's a QR code there which we can all scan, and that will put us directly in touch with you. There's some comments.
And you have a copy, Sam.
Yep.
You have a copy, Sam, of the PDF, so you can feel free to send it out to the participants. No issue there, and yeah, people can reach out and I'll respond.
We'll fire those presentations around, and there's some lovely comments, thank you comments coming up in the chat now. So thank you very much, Philippe. We really appreciate your time today. It's been incredibly insightful, so much to learn, and we'll speak to you again in probably less than a year when everything has changed once again. But in the meantime, I'm going to go off and start some pre-bunking. Don't forget November the 5th and 6th is the EMPA conference at Tapapa this year. Thank you very much for joining us, everyone. Take care. Thank you, Philippe. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sam. Bye-bye.